Snow fell like shards of glass, cutting through the endless night of planet Vorex 9. The winds howled over the frozen plains, strong enough to shake even the iron shelters that dotted the wasteland. Inside one of those shelters lived a human, Mark Renner, a war veteran who had chosen exile over peace. He wanted silence, far from the noise of battles and the memories that haunted him. Every night was the same: the sound of wind, the hum of his heater, and the ache in his chest that refused to fade. Mark sat beside the flickering fire, his rifle resting against the wall. He had seen enough death to last 3 lifetimes. The galaxy had forgotten heroes like him, and he preferred it that way. But tonight the silence was broken. At first he thought it was just the storm. Then he heard it again, a deep, mournful howl that echoed through the storm. It wasn't mechanical, not the sound of drones or scavengers. It was alive. Another cry followed, closer this time. Then came scratching, metal claws scraping against his shelter's outer hatch. Mark grabbed his rifle and crept toward the door. His breath fogged in the cold air. He switched on the outer camera and the small screen flickered to life. What he saw made his heart skip. 3 creatures stood outside, half buried in snow. They looked like wolves, but not the kind Earth had. Their fur shimmered faintly blue under the snow, and their eyes glowed with pale light. Steam rose from their bodies as if their blood carried heat in the frozen night. One of them stumbled, falling to its knees, and raised its head toward the camera. Its eyes met his through the lens, not wild, not angry, pleading. Mark cursed under his breath. What the hell? He had seen strange things during his service. Alien beasts, plasma storms, mutant hybrids, but never creatures that looked this desperate. They were freezing to death. He hesitated. Opening the door meant letting the cold in and maybe death. But leaving them outside meant killing something helpless. His soldier's heart argued with his survivor's instincts. Another howl rose, weak and trembling, like a cry for help. Damn it, Mark muttered and hit the release switch. The door groaned open, wind blasting snow into the shelter. The creatures stumbled inside one by one. They collapsed near the fire, shaking violently. Their fur was caked with ice and their breathing came in ragged gasps. Mark shut the door quickly, locking out the storm. He aimed his rifle but didn't fire. They didn't attack. They just lay there, panting, eyes half closed. Then he noticed something, a metallic collar around the neck of the largest one. It blinked with a faint green light, and a broken translator device hung from it. The wolf's head lifted slowly. Its mouth opened and a broken, static voice came from the translator. Please help.
Our pack.
Mark froze. He stared at the creature, unable to move. The words were clumsy, robotic, but clear enough. These weren't animals. They were thinking beings, intelligent and speaking in broken human tongue. Who did this to you? Mark whispered, lowering his rifle. The largest one struggled to lift its paw, showing a deep burn mark, circular with a small human symbol inside. Mark's eyes widened. He recognized it. It was the insignia of the Xylon Mining Corps, the same corporation he once fought for. His throat went dry. The same people who had destroyed entire planets for minerals had come here too. And now their victims were at his feet. The smallest wolf whimpered, its fur covered with frost. Without thinking, Mark pulled off his thick jacket and wrapped it around the creature. Easy now. Stay warm, he said softly. The wolves watched him carefully, their glowing eyes following every movement. When he placed a heating pad near them, one of them lowered its head almost like a bow. Mark sat back near the fire, his mind spinning. He couldn't believe what he'd done, letting unknown aliens into his home. But something about their eyes, the way they looked at him, felt familiar. He had seen the same look in the eyes of soldiers begging for rescue during the war. Outside, the wind roared louder. The storm was growing worse. Suddenly, his scanner beeped. Mark glanced at the monitor. 3 unidentified drones were approaching from the north. His heart pounded. The wolves lifted their heads, growling softly. Someone's tracking you, Mark said quietly. The oldest wolf let out a faint sound, almost a word. Hunters. Mark stood and loaded his rifle. Then you're not leaving this place, he said grimly. Not tonight. As the lights of the approaching drones glowed brighter through the storm, Mark realized something that made his hands tremble, not with fear, but with purpose. He had thought his war was over, But tonight, in this frozen wasteland, it was about to begin again. And this time, he wouldn't be fighting for humans. The storm outside howled like a living thing, battering the metal walls of Mark's shelter. The small heater buzzed weakly, fighting to keep the room warm. The alien wolves lay near the fire, their bodies trembling less now, steam rising slowly from their fur. Mark watched them carefully, his rifle across his knees. He had seen strange creatures before, but nothing like this. Nothing that could speak. He turned the translator device over in his hands. It was old, cracked, and half-frozen. The display flickered between static and alien text. When he pressed a small button on its side, a weak voice spoke again. "Help, pack." "Safe," Mark frowned. "Your pack? You mean more of you?" The largest wolf, the one wearing the broken collar, raised its head. Its eyes were sharp, intelligent, full of pain and worry. It nodded once. Then with a trembling paw it scratched on the floor. 3 marks. 3 more out there. Mark's chest tightened. "There are more of you in that storm?" The wolf gave a low growl like a yes. For a moment Mark looked toward the door. The blizzard was still roaring outside. If those others were still out there, they wouldn't last long. He rubbed a hand over his tired face. He didn't want to get involved. Every time he tried to help, someone ended up dead. He was supposed to be done with saving lives. But then the small wolf, barely half the size of the others, lifted its head weakly and licked the edge of his jacket. Its glowing eyes stared into his. And suddenly Mark saw his own child's face there, the little girl he lost during the war. He swallowed hard. "All right," he muttered. "Let's bring them home." He pulled on his snow gear, grabbed a thermal blanket, and opened the airlock. The wind screamed instantly, biting at his skin. The wolves behind him howled low, a sound of hope. Mark stepped into the storm. Visibility was nearly zero. Ice crystals whipped at his goggles, blinding him. He turned on his thermal scanner. Nothing but static at first. Then faint heat signatures flickered about 50 meters north. He pushed forward, each step sinking deep into the frozen ground. When he reached them, his heart twisted. 2 wolves lay buried in the snow, one barely breathing, the other already stiff. The third, smaller, was curled around them, refusing to leave. "Hey, easy," Mark whispered, kneeling beside them. "I got you." The small one snapped weakly, then froze when he lifted the blanket over them. It sniffed the air, recognizing his scent, then lowered its head, letting him help. Mark carried the smallest in his arms and dragged the others on the blanket, step by step through the blizzard until the shelter's lights came into view again. Inside, the wolves rushed toward their fallen kin. The young one whimpered softly, rubbing its head against the cold bodies. Mark did what he could, heated packs, water, anything, but it was too late for one. The others huddled silently, mourning. Mark sat by the wall, exhausted. His clothes were soaked, his hands numb. He didn't understand why he had done it. He didn't even know these creatures. Yet looking at them now, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The translator crackled again. The female voice came clearer this time. "You help. Not soldier?" Mark looked up, startled. "Not anymore." The wolf tilted its head. "Human, that kind?" He gave a half smile. "Sometimes. Depends who you ask." The largest wolf stood shakily and limped closer. Its glowing eyes met his. It spoke slowly through the broken translator. "Humans. Took our land. Burned. Then we ran." Mark clenched his fists. He didn't need to hear more. He had seen what the corporations did to alien worlds. Strip the land, kill the life, and move on. "Who's hunting you?" he asked quietly. The wolf gave a single growl. Then through the translator came one word that froze his blood. "Humans." At that moment, the motion sensor alarm went off. The screen flashed red, 3 human drones moving toward his location. "Damn it," Mark hissed. "They tracked you here." The wolves lifted their heads, growling softly, eyes glowing brighter. The air inside the shelter grew tense. Mark rushed to the control panel. He activated his old jamming field, the one he had built for emergencies. The signal spread through the air, distorting the drone's scanners. On the monitor, he watched as they stopped, confused, then began to circle the area. He turned to the wolves. "If they find you here, they'll kill all of you." The leader wolf tilted its head. "Then we fight." Mark gave a dry laugh. "You sound just like the soldiers I knew." The smallest one crawled toward him, pressing its head against his leg. It was shaking, not from cold, but from fear. Mark's chest ached again. He rested a hand on its soft, glowing fur. Don't worry. I've fought worse. Outside, red lights flickered through the storm. The drones were closing in fast. Mark grabbed his rifle and took a deep breath. All right, he whispered to himself. Let's see what the old soldiers still got. He turned to the wolves, eyes hard but calm. You stay low. I'll handle the machines. The wolves growled softly, ready to defend their new protector. As Mark stepped to the door, the leader spoke one last time through the translator, its voice clear and firm. Human. Friend, the word hit him like a punch. For years, no one had called him that. Mark smiled faintly beneath his helmet. Let's keep it that way. He opened the door, and the storm swallowed him whole, rifle in hand, heart burning like fire against the endless cold. Snow whipped across the barren plains as Mark Renner stepped out of his shelter, rifle in hand, his breath fogging instantly in the frozen air. The sky above was a swirling mass of white and gray. But through the storm's chaos, red lights blinked in the distance, 3 human drones moving in tight formation, scanning for heat signatures. Mark crouched low behind a snow dune. He knew these machines. He had once deployed them himself during the wars. Each one could track a heartbeat from 2 miles away, unless someone knew how to hide. He smirked faintly. Let's see if you remember your maker. Inside the shelter, the alien wolves huddled close to the heater. Their leader, the largest with silver-blue fur and piercing eyes, watched the monitor as the drones advanced. The small pup whimpered, burying its face in its mother's side. The translator around the leader's neck flickered softly. He up fight alone? The middle wolf growled in return. He is foolish. No, the leader replied, her voice faint but steady. He is brave. Out in the storm, Mark connected a cable from his rifle to his wrist pad. The old interface flickered alive, showing the drone's weak points. They were still running on the Xylon mining core frequency, something he knew how to scramble. He tapped a few commands, causing one of the drones to twitch mid-air. Still works, he muttered. He aimed and fired. The pulse round struck the first drone's sensor eye, shattering it into shards of glowing metal. The explosion flashed like lightning in the snow. The other 2 reacted instantly, firing blue plasma bolts toward his position. Mark dove behind a frozen rock outcrop. The shots seared the snow, turning it into steam. He rolled, aimed, and fired again, taking down the second drone with a precise shot through its power core. The third one retreated higher, scanning wildly for its attacker. Mark switched tactics. He opened a comm line overriding its control system. Authorization code 22 Bravo, he said. Identify, the drone paused. Its AI recognized the code. For a moment it hesitated, hovering still. Mark grinned. Gotcha. He sent a feedback command and the drone's core overloaded, dropping it into the snow like a dying bird. Silence fell, broken only by the wind. Mark stood up, brushing ice from his armor. The smell of burnt circuits filled the air. He turned back toward the shelter, satisfied, until a low hum grew louder behind him. He spun around. A large recon carrier descended through the storm clouds, floodlights cutting through the snow. His blood ran cold. They sent a carrier? Already? He sprinted back toward the shelter. Inside, the wolf sensed his fear before he even reached the door. The translator crackled as he entered, his armor covered in frost. More are coming, he said quickly. Not drones, humans. The leader's ears flicked up. They hunt again, Mark nodded grimly. Yeah, and they're not leaving until they find you. He began pulling open panels, connecting wires, and setting up power relays. The wolves watched curiously. What, do? I'm jamming their radar, he explained. But it won't last long. They'll switch to thermal. The smallest wolf padded closer, watching him with wide, glowing eyes. Mark gave it a faint smile. Don't worry, kid. I've dealt with worse. He paused, staring at the tiny creature. Its fur was still damp from the melted frost. It wagged its tail slightly, like it understood. Something inside him softened. He hadn't felt that kind of trust in years. The shelter lights flickered as the jamming field activated. On the radar, he saw the carrier circling above, scanning, confused. But then one of the wolves sneezed. The heat spike showed on the scanner for half a second. Mark cursed. They saw that. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window slit. Figures in white armor began advancing through the snow, human soldiers carrying plasma rifles, their helmets glowing blue under the stormlight. The wolves growled, low and dangerous. The leader's fur bristled. "We fight," Mark hesitated. "No, you stay down. I'll handle them." The leader met his gaze, unflinching. "We fight." Together, he couldn't argue. Something in her voice reminded him of his old squad commander. Brave, unbreakable. He nodded once. "All right then, together." He handed her a small disc. "When I say now, press this." The wolves watched as he opened the outer hatch slightly. The storm howled in, bringing with it flashes of blue light from plasma shots. Mark fired back, his shots precise, calculated. 2 soldiers fell instantly. The others ducked behind rocks, returning fire. "Now," Mark shouted. The wolf slammed the disc on the ground. A bright pulse of energy surged outward, knocking the remaining soldiers off their feet. It was a shockwave mine, one of Mark's old toys. The wolves charged out, moving faster than the wind. Their claws slashed through armor like blades, their roars echoing across the icy plain. Mark followed, covering them with suppressing fire. The scene was chaos, snow, fire, and blood. When the last soldier fell, silence returned. Steam rose from the ground, and the snow was stained with blue light from the shattered armor. Mark stood in the aftermath, chest heaving. The wolves gathered around him, their glowing eyes reflecting the fires of the wreckage. The leader approached him, lowering her head slightly. Through the translator came a single word, "Brother." Mark blinked, speechless. He had been called many things in his life, soldier, mercenary, traitor, but never that. He looked up at the burning wrecks in the distance, and then back at the wolves. "You're safe. For now." The leader's gaze turned toward the horizon. "No, they come again, bigger." Mark sighed, feeling the old ache of war stirring in his chest. "Then we make this place ready." He looked at them all, the tired, wounded, loyal eyes staring back. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Outside, lightning flashed across the storm. In the far distance, engines rumbled. The next wave was coming, and this time Mark wasn't running. The next morning came slowly, the pale light of dawn struggling to pierce the endless storm clouds above. The blizzard had weakened, but the cold was still enough to freeze metal. Mark Renner stood outside the shelter, rifle slung over his shoulder, staring at the horizon where the bodies of the fallen soldiers lay buried under snow. He had cleaned the battlefield before sunrise, disabling the soldiers' trackers and dragging the wrecked drones into a nearby crater. It wasn't out of hatred, it was survival. He knew more would come, and next time they'd bring heavier firepower. Inside, the wolves rested quietly around the heater. Their wounds were healing faster than Mark expected, glowing faintly beneath their fur. Their leader, the silver-furred female, watched him with sharp eyes as he entered. The translator around her neck flickered weakly but still worked. "You save us," it said, the robotic voice trembling. Mark shrugged and poured hot liquid from his thermos into a small bowl, pushing it toward them. "Just keeping you alive. That's all." The small pup sniffed the bowl curiously and began to lap at the steam, tail flicking happily. Mark couldn't help but smile. It reminded him of his daughter again, always curious, always fearless. The memory ached like a scar that never healed. He sat beside the heater, rubbing his frozen hands together. "You've got names, don't you?" he asked. The leader tilted her head. "Name, Lyra," the translator said slowly. "Lyra," Mark repeated. "Pretty name." The middle wolf raised its head. "I am Kor," Mark nodded, memorizing them. "And the little one?" The pup looked up with glowing blue eyes, head cocked to one side. Lyra lowered her snout, touching the pup's head gently. "Tira," she said. "Tira," Mark whispered. "Got it." For a moment, silence filled the shelter, quiet, peaceful, almost human. But then Mark noticed something strange. The fur around Kor's shoulder had been burned in a circular pattern, revealing a faint metal brand underneath. He leaned closer and frowned. "What's that mark?" Lyra looked away, the translator humming with static. "Human mark," Mark's breath caught. He examined it carefully. The brand was small but familiar, an insignia he knew too well. A circle with 3 vertical lines cutting through it. His own division's symbol from the war. He stepped back slowly, heart pounding. "No, that can't be." Lyra's voice came again, sharper now. "Humans came. Promised peace. Said they'd protect. But they took our land. Our children. Burned our dens." Mark's fists clenched. His division had been part of Operation Frostfall, a campaign he thought was about mining resources, not exterminating species. He had left the army after that mission, disgusted by what he saw, but he never knew who the victims truly were, until now. He sank into a chair, staring at the floor. The silence between them grew heavy. Lyra stepped closer, her glowing eyes filled with something that wasn't hate but deep sadness. "You fought with them," she said. Mark didn't deny it. "Yeah, I did. I thought we were helping people. Turns out we were the monsters." Lyra tilted her head, studying his face. Then softly she said, "You stop. You protect." "That is different," he met her gaze. "Doesn't erase what I did." "No," she replied through the translator. "But it begins to heal." The pup, Tira, walked closer to him and dropped something at his feet. A small metallic tag half buried in ice. Mark picked it up. His hands trembled when he read the name stamped on it. Capt. Renner, Mark D. Frostfall Unit. He looked at Lyra, shocked. "Where did you find this?" "Old field," she said. "Buried with bones. Yours?" Mark stared at the tag for a long moment before answering. "No, my men." He swallowed hard. "They must have died when the storm hit that night. I thought I was the only survivor." Lyra's ears flicked. Storm was not storm. Was weapon, he frowned. "Weapon?" She nodded slowly. "Skyfire. Humans test. They call it ion cleansing. Killed pack. Burned sky. Frozen ground." Mark's stomach turned. He remembered the reports. A weapon that could neutralize biological life without damaging minerals. It had been used once and then covered up. He had been knocked unconscious during that mission and rescued later, never knowing the truth. Now he did. He stood up abruptly, anger boiling inside him. "They told us it was a natural storm. They lied to us all." Lyra watched him quietly. "You know truth now. What will you do?" Mark looked at the wolves, the survivors of his army's sin. He looked at the tag in his hand, the metal cold against his skin. "I'll make it right." The translator flickered again as Lyra stepped forward. "Then we help." He smiled bitterly. "You'd trust a human again?" Her glowing eyes softened. "You are not them." The words hit deeper than he expected. He nodded slowly. "All right. Then we prepare. They'll be back soon. And they'll bring hell with them." He turned toward the supply room, pulling out weapons and old energy cells. Lyra followed him, curious. "Human make war again?" Mark glanced back at her, a grim smile forming. "No. This time we fight for peace." The pup barked softly, tail wagging, unaware of the danger ahead. Kor began sharpening his claws against the floor, readying himself for the coming storm. Outside, the wind howled again. But this time, it sounded different. Not just a storm's cry, but a whisper of vengeance rising from the frozen world. And as Mark stood there, surrounded by the very beings he was once trained to destroy, he finally understood something. The war he thought he'd escaped was never over. It had just been waiting for him to choose the right side. The wind screamed across the icy plain, carrying with it the scent of war. Mark Renner stood at the top of a ridge, his rifle slung across his chest, the wolves flanking him like silent shadows. Below, faint lights blinked through the storm, dropships descending from orbit. He knew the sound too well. "Human reinforcements," he gritted his teeth. "They're not stopping this time," he muttered. Behind him, Lyra, the silver-furred leader, stepped closer. The translator on her collar flickered. "They come again?" Mark nodded grimly. "They're bringing an entire squad. Maybe more." Kor, the large male, growled low, his fur bristling. "Then we kill them all." Mark shook his head. "Not if we can help it. We can't win a full-on war out here." Lyra tilted her head, her glowing eyes steady. "Then we do what humans do best." "We survive," he smirked faintly at that. "You're learning fast." Back inside the shelter, Mark worked quickly. He spread a holographic map across the table, a projection of the terrain. The wolves watched as he pointed to the surrounding cliffs. "These ridges here, if they come through this valley, they'll funnel right into the choke point." "Perfect for an ambush," Kor's tail swished. "You mean trap?" "Exactly," Mark said. "You use the wind, the cold, and the ice. Let them think we're hiding, then strike." Lyra stared at the hologram for a long moment. "This plan," she said slowly, "you made many times before." He paused, staring at the map. "Yeah, but this time it's for the right reasons." Hours passed as the storm thickened. The wolves moved silently, digging trenches and scattering snow over Mark's old mines. Tira, the pup, helped by dragging small cables with her teeth, earning a chuckle from Mark every time she tripped over her tail. When everything was set, Mark climbed back to the ridge. He could see the orange glow of engines below. The humans were landing. He adjusted his scope. At least 20 soldiers in thermal armor, armed with plasma rifles and drones. Leading them was a tall man in black armor, the Xylon Corps insignia shining on his chest. Mark's blood ran cold. He knew that armor. Commander Holt, he whispered bitterly, the man who had once been his superior, the one who gave the order to fire the ion-cleansing weapon during Operation Frostfall, the butcher who destroyed the Wolves' world, and the reason Mark left the military. He gripped his rifle tighter. You finally came back. Down in the valley, the soldiers advanced cautiously, their scanners sweeping the area. Holt's voice echoed through the comms. Keep formation. The deserters somewhere nearby. And remember, our orders are clear. Terminate all non-human life forms. From the ridge above, Lyra's eyes glowed fiercely. He speaks death, Mark nodded. He always did. He pulled a detonator from his belt and whispered, now. The first mine exploded, sending a wall of snow crashing down. The soldiers panicked, slipping and falling as the wolves charged out from the mist. Lyra leapt first, a blur of silver against white. Corps followed, slamming into a soldier with the force of a cannon. Mark opened fire from above, his shots precise, his years of training guiding every move. Plasma bolts lit up the storm. Drones screamed overhead, firing wildly into the blizzard. One drone locked onto Lyra, charging a plasma burst, but Mark was faster. He shot it out of the sky with a single round. The explosion reflected in his visor. Stay low, he shouted. Lyra and Corps tore through the snow, moving faster than any human could track. Their claws gleamed, their movements perfectly in sync. Tira darted behind them, throwing off small flares that blinded the drone's sensors, just as Mark had taught her. It was working. For a moment they were winning. Then the dropship engines roared again. A massive mech descended, slamming into the ice. It stood 2 stories tall, with mounted plasma cannons glowing red. Holt's voice thundered from the loudspeaker. You can't hide forever, Renner. You chose the wrong side. Mark ducked behind cover as the mech opened fire, melting everything in its path. The wolves scattered, howling in defiance. He looked at Lyra. We have one chance. What chance? She asked through the translator. Mark pulled a small black device from his vest. An old EMP charge. It'll fry that thing's systems, but someone has to plant it underneath. Corps stepped forward. I go. Mark shook his head. No, it has to be me. I know where its weak point is. Lyra's eyes met his. You die, human. He gave a small smile. Wouldn't be the first time I almost did. Before she could answer, he sprinted into the storm. Plasma bolts seared past him, lighting the snow blue. He slid under the mech's legs, clamping the charge to its power conduit. Let's see if you still remember me, Holt. He pressed the trigger. A flash of light swallowed the sky. The mech convulsed, sparks flying before collapsing into the snow. The explosion threw Mark back, his visor cracking. When he opened his eyes, the battlefield was quiet. The mech burned in the distance, and the surviving soldiers were retreating. Lyra and Corps approached, limping but alive. Tira ran ahead, whining softly. Lyra lowered her head beside Mark. You fight like us, she said. Fierce, without fear. He coughed, smiling faintly. Guess I learned from the best. Lyra's glowing eyes softened. No, human. You remind us why we still fight. As the storm began to fade and silence returned to the frozen world, Mark looked toward the horizon. He knew Holt wasn't dead, and neither was the war. But for the first time in years, Mark Renner wasn't running. He had a pack now, and he would stand with them until the very end. Night fell once again over the frozen world, but this time the darkness wasn't peaceful. The horizon glowed faintly red where fire burned through the endless snowfields. The last battle had ended only hours ago, yet already the air hummed with the sound of engines. More dropships were coming. Mark Renner stood at the mouth of a frozen canyon, the wind biting at his face. His armor was dented, one shoulder plate cracked from the last fight. Around him, the wolves rested in silence, their eyes glowing like small blue stars in the white void. They won't stop, he said quietly. They'll bring everything they've got. Lyra, the silver-furred leader, stood beside him. The translator on her neck flickered weakly, half frozen. Then we end it tonight, she said. Mark nodded. He looked down at Tira, the smallest wolf still limping from a wound. He knelt and placed a hand on her head. You stay inside with Core, no arguments. The pup let out a soft whine, eyes full of fear. Human not come back? The translator echoed faintly. Mark smiled sadly. I'll try my best, kid. But if I don't, you make sure they remember what we did here. He stood and turned toward the others. Get ready. They'll be here in minutes. The first wave came fast, 2 transports cutting through the snowstorm flanked by scout drones. Their engines ripped the silence apart. From the ground, Mark triggered an old beacon, a false distress signal mimicking human coordinates. The drones turned immediately, fooled by the signal. As they dropped altitude to investigate, Lyra and her pack launched from the cliffs, slamming into the machines mid-air. The sound of tearing metal filled the storm. Sparks rained down like fireflies. Mark opened fire from below, hitting the transport engines with armor-piercing rounds. One exploded in a brilliant flash, spiraling into the canyon wall. The second veered off, crashing into the ice plain. But then came the sound Mark dreaded most, a low, deep roar of engines unlike any human ship. A massive assault carrier appeared above the storm clouds, its size dwarfing everything below. From its belly, dozens of armored mechs descended, their red sensors glowing like eyes of demons. Fall back, Mark shouted, running toward the shelter. The wolves followed, howling into the storm as plasma fire rained down from the sky. The snow around them melted into steam. Mark slid into cover behind a frozen ridge and fired back, taking down one mech's sensor core. Lyra leapt over him, her claws cutting through another's armor joint, but there were too many. Mark, Lyra called, her translator sparking. We cannot win. Mark reloaded his rifle, panting. We don't need to win. We just need to end this. He pulled a small remote from his belt, a reactor detonator linked to his old ship buried beneath the ice. The ship's fusion core was unstable, but powerful enough to take down the entire enemy fleet if detonated. Lyra saw the device and froze. You and die too, Mark met her eyes. Yeah, he smiled faintly. But I've been dead for a long time anyway. Before she could answer, a massive explosion rocked the canyon. A mech fired a plasma shell that struck near them, throwing Mark to the ground. His ears rang. Snow and smoke filled the air. Through the haze, he saw Lyra standing over him, growling fiercely as she shielded him from another blast. Her fur burned in places, but she didn't back down. Go, he shouted. Get out of here! No, she roared, her voice coming through broken static. We fight together. Core and Tira appeared beside her, limping but determined. The pack stood as one, surrounding Mark while the mechs closed in. He looked at them, these creatures who had once been enemies, now his family. You shouldn't have followed me, he whispered. Lyra's eyes softened. You are pack. The mechs advanced, weapons glowing. Mark raised the detonator, the snow swirling wildly around him. Then let's make it count. He pressed the button. The ground shook. For a brief, blinding second, the entire sky turned white. The blast tore through the canyon, swallowing ships, drones, and mechs alike. The shock wave melted the ice, shattered the rocks, and sent a roaring wind across the plains. Then silence. When the light faded, the assault carrier was gone, nothing left but twisted metal and falling snow. The entire battlefield lay buried beneath steam and debris. In the heart of the crater, the wolves stirred weakly. Lyra lifted her head, her fur scorched, but her eyes still glowing faintly. Mark, she whispered. There was no answer, only the sound of the wind. She crawled forward through the smoke until she found him, lying on the ground, armor cracked, his face peaceful. The detonator still in his hand. Lyra pressed her snout against his chest. No heartbeat. She let out a low, mournful howl that echoed across the ice. One by one, the other wolves joined her, their voices rising into the storm, a chorus of grief and honor. As dawn broke, the snow began to fall again, soft and gentle, covering the battlefield like a white shroud. Far above, the clouds parted briefly, and sunlight spilled across the canyon. For a moment, the ice reflected the light in shapes that looked almost human, standing tall, rifle in hand, watching over them. Lyra closed her eyes. You fight like one of us, she whispered. Now you rest with us. And when the wind carried her words away, the story of the human and the frozen pack was born, a tale that would travel through the stars, whispered by both man and beast, that once on a dying world, a single human stood against his own kind and became more than human. He became legend. The storm had ended. For the first time in months, the skies over Vorex 9 were clear. The twin suns rose slowly, their pale light spilling across the shattered canyon where fire and frost once danced together. Steam rose from the melted plains and the snow glistened like a sea of glass. No sound came from the battlefield now. No engines, no drones, no gunfire, only the whisper of the wind as it passed over the ruins of war. Beneath the soft layer of ash and ice, something stirred. Lyra, her fur scorched in silver, lay half-buried beside a broken ridge. Her breathing was shallow, each exhale turning to mist. Around her, the pack began to wake one by one, their glowing eyes flickering faintly in the morning light. Tira whimpered weakly, nudging her mother's side. "Lyra," Kor said softly through a damaged translator on his neck. "The human—" "Where?" Lyra opened her eyes slowly. The light hurt. She turned her head and saw him, Mark Renner, lying still amid the ruins. His armor was half melted, his rifle broken beside him. Snow covered his face like a veil. She crawled toward him, every step heavy with pain. The translator on her collar crackled as she spoke. "Mark, wake." No answer. She pressed her snout to his chest. No heartbeat. The air around her grew still, the wind pausing as if the world itself waited for her cry. Then it came. A long, deep howl that echoed through the canyons, rising high into the cold sky. The others joined her, their voices merging into a single sound that seemed to shake the heavens. The frozen world mourned its savior. But something strange began to happen. The ground beneath Mark's body pulsed faintly with blue light. The wolves stepped back, eyes wide. The snow around him started to melt, revealing a soft glow beneath his chest armor. Lyra tilted her head. "What is this?" Tira took a cautious step forward, sniffing at the light. "Warm," she whispered. The glow spread, seeping into the ground like roots of light. The frozen soil cracked and steam hissed upward. It was not fire. It was life. Mark's final act, the explosion of his ship's fusion core, had not only destroyed the invaders, it had awakened the planet itself. The energy from the blast had merged with the strange biomagnetic field buried deep beneath the ice, something ancient and alive. And now, that ancient force was responding. The ice began to move. Massive sheets of frost split open, revealing rivers of blue liquid flowing beneath. Crystals sprouted from the ground like flowers, glowing softly. The wolves stepped back, stunned. Lyra looked up at the mountains as faint tremors shook the earth. "The world breathes again," she whispered. Kor nodded slowly. "Human gave his life. World remembers." They watched as the light spread across the horizon, reaching places untouched by warmth for centuries. What had been a world of death now shimmered with new energy. Lyra turned her gaze back to Mark. His face was peaceful, eyes closed as if in sleep. The snow around him glowed faintly, his outline shining like a constellation. Tira pressed her head against his arm. "He's still warm," she murmured. "No," Lyra said softly, her voice trembling. "Not gone, changed." She could feel it, something within the air, within the ground, whispering through the frost. His energy was part of it now, carried through every gust of wind, every flicker of light. When the next wave of snow drifted across the land, the wolves looked up. High above the clouds, a faint shape appeared, a silhouette of a man standing tall, rifle in hand, surrounded by light. Lyra bowed her head. "He guards us still." From that day forward, the wolves rebuilt. They returned to their ancient dens, but the ice no longer bit with deadly cold. Warmth flowed beneath the surface, and strange plants began to bloom where the light had touched. The humans never returned. The corporations withdrew, claiming the planet was unstable, and yet, every traveler who passed near Vorex 9 would see the same thing. Towering wolf-like shapes watching from the cliffs, eyes glowing blue, and beside them, the faint outline of a human figure, tall and silent, made of ice and light. Legends spread across the galaxy. They said a lone soldier had turned against his kind to defend a dying world. They said his sacrifice had awakened a frozen planet and forged a bond that time itself could not break. The wolves called him Brother Mark. The few surviving humans who heard the story called him the Guardian of Frostfall. But Lyra knew the truth. Every time the wind howled through the canyons, she could hear his voice in it, calm, steady, human. "Keep the fire alive, Lyra. Don't let it fade." And she would lift her head to the sky and whisper, It never will. As the sun set behind the frozen peaks, the land glowed faintly, alive once more. The human's legend lived in the hearts of the wolves, carried in their songs, their howls, their silence, for on that world of endless winter a human had given everything, and in return the world itself remembered his name. Mark Renner, the man who melted the ice, the man who became one with the frozen dawn,